when you need to give the user the flexibility of adding multiple items to a post, you need repeaters. But can you add that to Elementor Forms? Simple answer, yes. But how? We'll find out. Now, here is a page I have built out with Elementor, and this is an Elementor Form. As you can see, this is a repeater, and you can add as many items as you wish to it. To accomplish this, I had to come into Gloo, then toggled on Forms extensions. Next, click on Settings. And now, ensure the repeater field is toggled on. And just so we can be sure that the repeater field in the front end is well connected to the repeater in the back end, we have to toggle on front end post submission, as you can see here. If you're curious about how to use front end post submission, post editing, user submission, and user editing, we've covered this in depth in another video, so check that out. Now, let's give you an idea about how we've set this up. We created a CPT called Stats, and we've populated it with a number of posts from 2022 measure of growth to 2027 measure of growth. Let's take a look at one of them. This is 2027 measure of growth. As you can see, we created a repeater and we called it Stats. And we have two fields within the repeater, one for month, the other for number. We use this to populate progress bar in the front end, which is dynamically populated according to the number of repeaters we have in here. If you're unsure about how to get this done, we've covered this in depth in another tutorial where we talked about the dynamic repeater tag. However, at this point, we're focused on creating an Elementor form that has that repeater. Now, let's come into the Elementor editor. And as you can see, this is an Elementor form. And we've added a title. We've given it an ID of title. Let's copy that. We'll need it soon. This is a text field. The next one, we've given it an ID of content, and it's a text area field. Now, let's begin to create the repeater. To start, let's add a new item. And the type would be repeater stat field. Of course, this would come after you have toggled on this within Gloo repeater field. So let's come back into the Elementor editor, select repeater stat field. Let's give it a label. And you have to be sure that the label you are giving it here is the label you want to appear here. So let's call it statistics. Let's give it an ID by coming into advanced and call this repeater start. Now let's add the items within the repeater. The first one would be the month. So let's add a normal text field and give it a label of month. Come into advanced, give it an ID of month. Let's add the number. Call the label numbers. And just because we want to keep it consistent with how it's called here. Doesn't matter if it's different, we just want to keep it consistent. Come into advanced and give it an ID of numbers. And once we're done creating that, we have to close out this repeater field by adding one last field, and it's called repeater end field. Take note that whatever you give to the label here becomes the label of this button, the button used to add many repeaters to this form. Whatever you give it here becomes this. So let's call this add a new month. And now we want to make sure that every single time this form is submitted, it creates a new post. So let's come into actions after submit and select front end post submission, which of course came after we toggled on this. Now there is a new accordion block here. Toggle it open, and it's for the post type called stats, which I have already selected before. The post status, let's make it published. It could be any of this. And now we're gonna give these IDs according to what we set them here. For the title, we called it title. So let's type that in here. For the content, we called it content. Let's leave the featured image because we don't need that. And now, if we added meta fields, we could add them here. However, they're not just ordinary meta fields. They are within the repeater field. So we're going to toggle on is repeater field? Yes. Now, what's the source? Jet engine? Yes, because that's what we use to create our repeater. You can also use ACF. Now, what is the form repeater ID? Toggle open form fields and check for repeater start field. Come into advanced and copy this ID. That becomes this ID right here. the source repeater ID would be this here. So let's copy that and paste it here. Now we have to add the subfields. So the first subfield is month in the form, and in the source it's also month. See why we kept it consistent? Month. This is numbers and numbers. Now, before I hit update, let me show you some other things. If we come into style, you'd see there is a new accordion block here called repeater field. You can use this to select the list style type. For example, if you needed to display as numbers, you can select decimal. If you needed to display as Roman numerals, you can select upper Roman. If you needed to display as alphabets like A, B, C, D to Z, you can use lower alpha. So whatever you wish to use to identify each of the repeater items within the field, be sure to select the list tab here. You can also select the close button color, the hover background color, the wrapper background color, which is the wrapper of the repeater field itself, and the border type and the box shadow. So just a few settings to ensure your repeater looks as good as you want it to. Now let's hit update. Let's come to the front end, refresh this, and see what we now have. Good. Now let's create a new one. Let's call it 2028 measure of growth. Add some new dummy content. Let me add a few items. Good. Now let's hit send. The form was sent successfully. Now let's refresh this, and we have the 2028 measure of growth created. Let's check it in the front end, and there we have it. That was a brief overview of the repeater field form extension of Gloo. Thank you for subscribing to our channel and for checking out the other tutorials found on gloo.oo. For now, bye bye.